Okay, so now we want to create our cart reducer and the action to add to our cart. We don't have the the functionality here on the screen yet, but you'll notice that the common flow that I have in this course is to add the constant, the reducer, the action, and then implement that action in the screen. So let's start off in constants, and we're going to create a new file called cartconstants.js. And all we're going to have here is add and remove. So let's say export const. We want to call this cart. Usually start it with whatever the resource is. So cart underscore add underscore item equals cart underscore add item. And then let's also have remove item. Okay. So that's all we need in our cart constants. Now I'm going to create the reducer. So I'm going to call this cart. Let's call this cartreducers.js. Now there's only going to be one single cart reducer, but I'm calling the file reducers just to keep with the naming convention that I'm using. And from here we want to import from dot slash constant slash cart constants, and we want to bring in our add item. So cart add item, and then let's create our function. So we want to export const, and this is going to be called cart reducer, and this is going to take in state, so the initial state, and this is going to be in this state object. We're just going to have cart items, which is going to be an array, because you can have more than one item in your cart, obviously. And then we also want to pass in the action. So here, let's add a switch. So our switch for the action type. And I'm just going to throw the default in here. So default is just going to return state. And then let's put our case for add, our cart add item. And this is going to be a little tricky because we have to handle if we click add cart and it's already there, if it exists, we have to handle that as well. So I'm going to put the payload in a variable called item. So let's say action dot payload. So we'll set that. And then let's find if it exists. So we'll create a variable called exist item, and we can get from our state in our cart items I want to find. Now what we get passed in this payload, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that has to do with the product. So we're going to have the ID called product. So here, this takes an arrow function. Let's say for each of the items that are in the current state cart items, let's say where x.product, which is going to be the ID, if that is equal to the current item dot product. So that means that it exists, and this will have it, or it'll be false. So if it exists, so if exists item, let's put an else here as well. If it doesn't exist, we're just going to push it to the array. So we'll return our state if it exists, and we'll just have whatever is already in the state. We'll spread that across this object, and then also for cart items, we're going to set it to an array with the current items, so state.cart items, and then we're just going to add that new item. Okay, so that's if it doesn't exist. If it does, then let's return our state, and for cart items we're going to set that to, we're going to map through the current cart items, so state.cartitems.map, and we'll say for each, we'll call it x, and then where x, or if x.product, so if the current iteration, if the current item ID is equal to the exist item dot product, which is the ID, then we're just going to return the item for this iteration, else then it'll be X. Okay, so whatever this is, it'll just stay the same. And I believe that should do it. So let's save this, and in order to use our cart reducer, we have to pass it into store.js. So under where we have our product reducer, let's import from, we want to go ./reducers/cart reducers, and we want to import from that cart reducer. And then down here, let's call this cart, this part of the state, and set that to our cart reducer. So you can see my naming convention. I call the reducer whatever I call it in the state, I just call that whatever that is and then reducer. Okay, so cart will be cart reducer. Let's save. And now if we go over here and we look in state, we should have cart and then cart items, which obviously is empty. So now let's create the add item or the add action. And I actually already have the file created. It's empty, but you want to go ahead and just create cart actions. And then from here we want to bring in Axios. And the reason we're bringing in Axios is because when we add an item to the cart, we want to make a request to API products and then the ID to get the fields, to get the data for that particular product to add to our cart. So we need Axios. We also want from our constants. From that we want cart add item. And then let's export a function called add to cart. And this is going to take in an ID and quantity, which in the screen we can get from the URL. And then we're going to use thunk, so we want to do async and pass in our dispatch. Now we're also going to be saving our entire cart to local storage here. And along with dispatch, we can actually pass in get state, and that allows us to get our entire state tree. So anything we want, like product list, product details, or cart, we can grab that with get state dot, and then whatever we want from here. And we're going to want the cart item, so we're going to pass that in. And then let's make our request. So we'll go ahead and destructure the data, and we're going to get that from Axios. So we have to await because it's asynchronous, and then axios.get, pass in some backticks. It's going to be API products slash and then whatever the ID that's passed in. And then once that's called, we're going to go ahead and dispatch, and the type is going to be cart add item, and then the payload is going to be an object, and first thing is going to be the product, which is going to be set to the data._ID. So product is going to be the product ID, and then name will be the come from data, that'll be the product name. We'll have the image, so data.image, because this is all stuff we want to display in our cart. The price, data.price, the count in stock, data.count in stock, and then last thing is the quantity, which is just coming from right here. Now once we dispatch this, we want to save it in local storage, so we can use our local storage API called set item. We're going to save this as cart items. Now we want to save the entire cart, so this is where we use get state, and we can say .cart, and then we want the cart items in our state. Now this is going to give us a JSON object or a JavaScript object, so we want to call JSON.stringify because we can only save strings in local storage. And then once we take it out, we'll have to use JSON.parse to parse it back to JavaScript. Alright, so that's our add to cart. Now we save it to local storage here, but where do we actually get it to fill the state? So we do that in our store. Remember, we have this initial state right here. So this is where we can get our cart items, and then later on we'll have our token and or our user or whatever in our initial state as well. But here I want to set, let's go right above it, and let's create a variable here called cart items from storage, and we want to fetch it from local storage. So we'll say local storage dot get item, and we called it cart items. Now if that's there, we want to, in this variable, we want to put whatever's in there, but we have to run it through json.parse, because remember, it gets stored as a string. So in json.parse, we'll say local storage get item cart items. Else, so if it's not found in local storage, else, then it's just going to be an empty array. Now this just creates the variable. To add it to our initial state, we're going to go down here, and we can add anything we want. Like on our cart state, I could set this to an object, and I could set cart items to hello. And if I look over here in state, I get hello in my cart items, and that gets loaded when the store gets loaded. Obviously I don't want that. What I want is my cart items from storage. And if we look at it right now, it should just be an empty array, because we don't actually have anything in local storage. We haven't ran that action. We haven't added anything to our cart. So we'll close this up, and then in the next video, so we can close the reducer and action up. In the next video, we'll go ahead and start to implement the add to cart in our cart screen, and then we ultimately want to show all the items in the cart as well.